Yama. My name is Marley Silver. I'm a proud Aboriginal woman from the Gamilaroi and Dunghutti tribes of New South Wales. On behalf of the Imperfects podcast, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the country on which this podcast is created, and in this, honour the ways in which their elders past and present have cared for and nurtured their lands and waterways for millennia. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people connected to each of the hundreds of countries that make up the continent of so-called Australia, and any of my brothers and sisters listening to this episode. I pay my respects to our leaders and knowledge keepers, past and present. Find strength in our survival for over 60,000 years, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Always was, always will be.
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to the Imperfects, our very own psychologist!
One of my favourite things about this podcast is watching Dr. M's face listening to her opener.
As I was listening to it then, it does, like, if you were, and this is absolutely not the case, but it does make it sound like, if you were a con artist lying to us about being a psychologist. That intro is like really trying to convince everyone, she's a psychologist, so don't ask any questions. Psychologist! How are you, Em?
I'm really good. Thank you. How are you guys?
We're good. Dr. M, I should say.
Yep.
I don't know why.
That's the title, thanks.
Yeah, well, we continue to remove the thing you worked so hard for. Dr. M. Now, without further ado, let's get right into the thick of things here. So as people know, when you come on, you look back into our previous episodes and you find an episode or a moment from an episode that you would like to revisit because you have thoughts, professional thoughts, trademarked, professional thoughts that you can share with us and the listeners that will be really helpful, no doubt.
Hopefully. Yeah, look.
Guarantee it.
100% guaranteed.
Wow.
Well, I do hope that it's useful because the episode that I wanted to talk about was Steen's episode, which was just an incredible episode, and what a generous share from him. I was really, so impressed with his vulnerability. And you guys did such an incredible job in terms of talking about kind of some major themes after his episode. But there were a couple of things that kind of stood out to me that I thought might be worthy of exploring a little bit more. And it really had to do with emotional awareness and emotional language, if that sounds all right for you guys.
It sounds really good. I was actually in Sydney on Friday, just gone, just for the day, and I was in Bondi, and I'm
a few flexes going on at the moment. Wow. What are you doing in Bondi? Top on or off?
I was in Bondi.
Yeah. Smoothie? Acai bowl?
I was driving. No, I was in an Uber.
Oh, God. Okay. Premium? Uber Lux?
And I was turning around the corner, or the Uber driver turned the corner, and
your driver?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm 82% sure I saw Steen. Does he live in Sydney?
No, well, he mainly lives in the UK, but his family live in Sydney, so he could be home visiting. Very possible.
He was he was pushing a pram. There was a baby in the pram, and there was
he has a child.
He has a child?
Yeah, he had a child.
I'm 92% sure now. Anyway.
You just said 82%.
Well, now there's a baby up to 92%.
It's gone on 10. Yeah. A baby's worth 10%.
Well, it's probably worth more because I thought that can't be Steen. He doesn't have a baby.
Okay.
But now, so anyways, pushing this pram. Sorry, Em. This is not what you came here to listen to a terrible story.
I'm sure it's not.
Anyway, so.
Now all I'm thinking of is I'm offended that he hasn't contacted me, that he's back. But that's okay. It's not about me. Not about me. He's clearly seeing family and his real friends. Cool.
He was with, if it was him, which it sounds like it was, he was crossing the road and we'd just driven past him. And I went, that's Steen. And I put the window down and I went, Steen, like really loud. And he turned around and everyone turned around. It wasn't like... If it wasn't him, the guy still turning because it was a loud yell,
A lot of people called Steen in Sydney though, so really unlucky that everyone in the vicinity was called Steen.
And he did a wave and a smile, but like under his breath as he was smiling. It's like he was going, "Who the fuck are you?"
Yeah,
and kind of waved.
Probably thought it was a fan, which you are, but
yeah,
also a friend fan.
Yeah, friend fan. Anyway, he. That's my anecdote about Steen.
Great.
That's the end of the story.
Love it. Good. I like the finish of "that's my anecdote."
It's never a good story when you have to finish by saying
that's the end.
And that's the end of my story.
Dr. M.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, so
Sorry.
no, don't be. I love that. And Steen. I mean, Steen's going to love this. He's getting a lot of love in this episode already.
Absolutely.
Dr. M.
So maybe to kick it off, Josh, if you're able to play that excerpt from Steen's episode, to give some context in this part of the episode, he's talking about a time when he was in high school and was feeling really overwhelmed and really struggling. And in this particular excerpt, he's referencing the school teacher that was in his classroom that responded to him in that particular moment.
And I think I had like 2 more periods of class, and he just sat me down and he said, like, "What's going on?" And I just started crying in front of him. And I said, "I don't know." And this was a thing, like that phrase, like, "I don't know," was something that had just kept following me. Like, even now, like there's so many times where, and I know I said a lot, like in my old relationship was a thing of I didn't have the language. I didn't know how to communicate how I felt. I didn't know why I was feeling like this. I didn't know why I couldn't talk to these people about, I still don't, like I didn't know how to say I was sad. I didn't know how to say I was sad, but do I have anything to be sad for? Because, I come from a great family, a loving family. I go to a great school, I can eat, I've got a roof over my head. But why am I feeling like this? And I remember like he sat me down and said, he just really kind of complimented me with my achievements and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't care about. And I said that means nothing to me. Like that doesn't bring me happiness, being those things. Doing those activities, like playing sport, yeah, that brings me happiness because, and it's with my shows, it's because for an hour, I don't think about anything else but being present in that room at that time with that group of people.
I just love Steen. I love, and him being able to talk about that, like parts of that really resonate with me. But what was it that you wanted to talk about, Dr. M, on that?
There were probably 2 things that stood out to me about that particular part. And the first really was around this I don't know experience, because I think this is really common. I certainly see this a lot when people are coming in to see me. And I think sometimes there can be a gender aspect to that, particularly for males around not having a language. But I think more generally.
That's when you're feeling sad and you don't know why.
Yeah, or even not even being able to identify that you're feeling sad, but that there's something wrong or something not right. So there's that part for me, that kind of sense of this tendency or this experience of not being able to name or to notice our emotional experience. But then also the second part of that was the inner dialogue that goes on around the shoulds. So I shouldn't feel this way because I have the family, the friends, the accolades at school. So there's 2 kind of components there. And, if we can explore those 2, I think that would be quite useful.
Love that. Yeah.
I'm so happy we're doing this because I think one of the things I get a little bit, one of the things I'm wary about when I talk all the time about gratitude is the last thing I want people to do is to listen to me speak and then think, oh, he's saying, well, I shouldn't feel bad because I've got a home. Oh, I've got access to, clean drinking water and I've got access to food. Well, I should just be happy then. So I'm happy we're talking about this because it's the last thing I'm saying to people when I'm saying just be grateful for what you've got.
Yeah.
That's kind of not the message at all. So I'm very happy to do this one.
Yeah, great. So I might just wanted to pick up, I guess, the first part, which was around kind of emotional language and emotional awareness. And I know that I speak about, and you guys probably do too, Brene Brown quite a lot, but her most recent book, Atlas of the Heart, actually is really very specifically talking about, I guess, the dangers of us not having a language for our emotional experience. And she gives a really great example. So this is not my example, this is her example of the problems, I suppose, of not being able to speak, to know or understand our emotional experience. And she likens it to having, for example, like a really strong pain or kind of injury in your arm that makes you go to the doctor. And when you get to the doctor, your mouth is suddenly gagged and your hands are tied behind your back. And when the doctor asks you what's wrong, you cannot speak. And so you kind of fling yourself around the room, but try as you might, nothing actually is communicating to the doctor what the problem is.
Oh, wow.
And I think that that really represents exactly what can happen for us when we don't have a sense or a language for our experience. And the two common experiences that show up is hopelessness, so that kind of feeling of despair, and the consequences of that can certainly, be like symptoms of depression. But then also the other aspect that can show up is anger or rage. Because if you imagine yourself kind of not being able to communicate, all you do is throw yourself around the room. So that kind of those two experiences.
Yeah, and so is that kind of like when you don't know what to do, that hopelessness is like it's so frustrating because it's like I have these feelings, I've lost control of in some way of like my life or my situation. And for a lot of people, that I guess that's scary when you have lost control of your ability to. You haven't got the ability to control your emotions or anything, and then is that just sort of like the precursor to then the anger that then happens? Can that lead to anger?
Yeah, absolutely. But even if we kind of go, a step back from that, if we look at kind of the origins of emotional awareness, and I'll probably say this all the time, but really foundational childhood experiences and what we experience and what we hear from our parents in terms of how they express emotion, but how they talk about emotion and how they respond to you as a child when you're feeling experiencing anything. And so particularly I think, I really hope that our generation, I think we're all of similar age, but of our generation, we're a little bit more perhaps educated.
Mid-20s.
Yeah. A little bit more educated around what emotions are acceptable and how to experience that. But perhaps, it's certainly not uncommon for children to hear or have heard, things like don't cry, suck it up. And Steen mentioned that quite explicitly, that was his experience. You don't show emotion, particularly, perhaps for boys, and that is certainly normalised and reinforced in, single-sex education too. So when we're taught from a very early age that it's not okay to show unpleasant emotion, so that could be sadness, it could be loneliness, boredom, rejection, any of those sorts of emotions, or even anger. When we're told that it's not okay to have those, in his words, you swallow it. So you internalize those experiences. But the thing is that as we age, that kind of coping strategy we kind of outgrow. And at some point or another, those emotions always come out, and they come out usually in a way that's either not helpful or destructive, or it comes out in terms of illness. So this kind of idea that the body is really holding all of this emotion that we haven't been able to either identify or express.
That's really, really good. I love that. So like emotional literacy, we talk about a lot. I guess that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
The ability to label what you're feeling as you're feeling it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an amazing researcher, Susan David, South African, who talks about it in terms of emotional agility and this kind of idea that we have to be able to experience and express all of our different emotional experiences. And she says that accuracy matters. And she calls this emotional granularity. So that's a cool thing to say. I think it makes a lot of sense. For me, if I say to you, for example, that I feel sad, as opposed to me saying I feel really lonely, or I feel dismayed, or I feel disappointed, or I feel bored, I feel rejected, does it feel like there's a difference in your response to those two different expressions?
Oh, big time.
Yeah, well, it's more information, I guess, and probably helps you to understand or to empathize with the person who's talking. But then how important is if someone says I'm lonely, how much of a part of it is the why? Like, why am I lonely?
Mm-hmm.
Like, does that come into it, or is that necessary, or is that maybe not necessary?
From a therapeutic perspective, or certainly in the way that I would work, the why doesn't come as the most important part for me.
Okay.
The first part is this recognition of the feeling. So being able to identify and really specify that this is actually what my feeling is.
Right.
And then once we know what it is, then we can have a look at why, or then we can have a look at kind of problem solving around that experience. But the key aspect is certainly this awareness of what this feeling is.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like so many of us sit with stuff that we don't actually know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that feeling of when I first went to the psych I went to, one of the first things she did was give me this list of it was like a booklet of just words. Like
The dictionary.
Yeah. Oh, you've heard of it?
Yeah. I haven't read it in years, but yeah, I know the gist of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought I was the only one.
No, it's good. It's really good.
No, it was like a list of emotions. And she said, I want you to read through these and really look them up if you don't know what they mean, really start to understand these words.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find a word that really hits the nail on the head and is exactly what you're feeling, it's like when you're getting a massage and you've had a knot in a muscle and it just releases all the tension. And I feel like it for so many things, obviously it's not going to fix everything, but it felt like it got me 80% of the way there, just being able to actually describe.
Just even to yourself.
To myself
Yeah.
and to other people, it was like, oh, I feel validated and recognized and seen, and I know what this is now. So if I can identify what it is, maybe I have a chance of, fix is probably not the right word, but working through it.
Cope.
So
Yeah.
Dr. M, without obviously, I know you're not Josh's therapist, but what do you hear when you hear that, as far as that feeling of feeling seen or validated in when you recognize the emotion that you're feeling and say it to someone else and they you're feeling lonely. What's happened? What's going on there?
Well, I think that's a really important question, and there's actually some really great research that really ties into this, I think. So Matthew Lieberman, who's at UCLA, did some really interesting research around brain activity in people that were suffering from depression and people that weren't. And he found that for people that were suffering from depression, through using fMRIs, the brain activity was really centering around.
What are fMRIs?
They're functional magnetic resonance imaging.
I knew that.
Pictures of the brain.
I'm glad
Is
you're
right.
right.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, she's spot on actually.
Yeah,
So they show basically blood flow, which is an indication of brain activity.
Yep.
So we can kind of see which parts of the brain is lighting up during certain experiences. And so for the people that were suffering from depression, they had a much greater activity in the amygdala, which is that threat center of the brain. But for people that were not suffering from depression, when they were talking about something that was upsetting, they noticed that there was more activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of the brain, the front of the brain, where we can regulate emotion. And what he was referencing there is this idea called affect labeling or emotional labeling. So when we are able to literally name and label what it is we're experiencing, we start to kind of mediate or integrate all of the information that is already showing up in the brain. So we get a whole activation of the brain rather than just the activation in, for example, the threat center. So we're using language to really kind of mediate the impact of those emotions.
That's so powerful, and actually I reckon that's what it feels like when you really get it right and you've hit the nail on the head. You feel like it's all coming to life in there. With that in mind, then, do you really need to tell anyone? Do you need to say it to someone else, or is working it out yourself enough?
No, it doesn't have to be that you're expressing it to other people. It can be that you're actually just being able to notice it and label it for yourself. And there are a couple of ways in which you can do that, and I think this is quite important. The first one that a lot of people find very helpful is journaling. So, that capacity to write down what it is that you're feeling. So some people find that to be really, really useful.
Can you think of any journals off the top of your head that you really like that people could use?
I think it's obviously to do with gratitude, maybe.
Yeah, the Resilience Project have them. Yeah.
Yep.
As long as I don't have to buy them. But no, I that really helps me, journaling. Like whenever I don't do it every day, but I do whenever, if I'm stressed or something horrible's happened or I'm sad. It is amazing. Every single time I'll write it out and just like think it out, talk about it within myself, and then I do feel better afterwards. Almost every time.
Do you ever read them? Go back and read?
Yeah, because the app, I use an app, which is like it's not a Resilience Project.
We have an app
product. I do actually have some things in my life that aren't Resilience Project branded. Sorry about that. But there are a few things that anyway. But I use this app, and what it does is it says, on this day 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it kind of like gives you prompts of things, and it's really cool because it kind of like takes you back.
What's the app? People will definitely want to know.
It's called Day One, and it's great. It's a beautiful looking app, but you use it on your phone and computer and everything, it all syncs together. But I love that function because every day there's a little notification that says like, you've done 4 entries on this day in the past, and it'll be like 10 years ago.
Wow.
And then it just takes me back to that time, and it kind of gives you good perspective.
This weird guy bailed me up in a cafe today.
Hopefully he never gets in contact with me again. So it really helps me. Yeah.
And I think what's actually so interesting about that is that if you do read back on that, those reflections, is that often they don't hold the same weight that they did at the time you're writing them.
Yes.
So it's this kind of idea that thoughts are not facts, and that if we can see that then they don't feel true today, but they felt true 2 weeks ago, I think that's really important information.
The other thing that it really helps with, the part of when you reflect on it, when you look back at the old, and a lot of people don't do this, and I know someone who writes every day in a journal, but he never reads it. Like, it's not the point of it. He just never reads it, which obviously is fine too. But what is helpful in going back and looking at them is seeing that, that really stressful thing that happened in 2014, which at the time felt so horrific, and I don't know how I'm going to get past this. But then now looking back on it, I can see clearly that was such an important thing in the journey of my life. That's like, as like a dot on my timeline, I wouldn't be where I am now. Like all the things that happened after that, like where I am literally now, there's a lot of crappy things that had to happen for me to then get in contact with Hugh and to then be here. So that is another really cool thing about going back and, well, first of all, journaling. But then as a secondary thing, if you are comfortable looking back at them, it can give you the perspective of how important even the tough things are.
Absolutely. If we go kind of one step further in terms of the labeling of emotion in particular, there's this notion or this idea that we name them to tame them. And this is Dan Siegel, who's I think in the School of Psychiatry, somewhere in America. So I apologize for not knowing.
Yep.
But he's incredible. And his, this theory is that if we name them, we tame them. And further to that, if we can use language around the emotion in a helpful way, that becomes even more powerful. So if I say to you that I feel really sad, or I feel really rejected, it's almost as though we're identifying like that is almost like part of my identity. I feel sad, or I am sad. But if we change that slightly and we say, I'm noticing that I'm feeling sad, or I'm noticing that I'm feeling lonely, does it feel like there's a different kind of tone or a different weight to that second expression?
Yeah.
It's almost like you're putting a distance between yourself and that. Like it isn't me, it's just what I'm going through at the moment.
Stage or something. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like in the same way that you are not your anxiety. So it's like your anxiety is like, it's like treating anxiety as a different person.
Yeah.
Or the loneliness as a different person who is dropped by, and you have to like hang out with them for a little bit, but then they're going to leave at some point. So just know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In some ways, it reminds me kind of like of this idea that And we use this quite a lot in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, this analogy that all of our uncomfortable thoughts, feelings and sensations are like a person knocking on your front door and we ignore them. So the first knock comes and we like, well, I didn't hear that and I don't really like the sound of that, and we ignore them. And then they keep on knocking and the knock gets louder and louder to the point that you cannot concentrate on anything else. But the invitation when we're, kind of bringing a mindful awareness to our experience or a compassionate awareness to our experience is that we actually open the door and we invite them in. And we don't like them and we probably don't want them to be there, but at least we can see them. And when we can see them, we get a much greater sense of how to work with them.
Yeah. And it's like when someone drops by that you aren't necessarily in the mood to see. It's like, loneliness. Good to see you. Yeah, come in. Take a seat. Do you want a drink? I mean, I've got a meeting in half an hour, but definitely come in for a little bit for sure.
Yep.
Then I'm going to have to unfortunately go.
Yep.
But yeah.
No, I mean that's exactly it. And if you didn't invite them in, then you'd almost never be allowed to leave the house in case you ran into them.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that a lot.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a great.
Really good. Great analogies.
How does it work for people who have never ever opened the door or have never who have put up the wall or whatever? How do you begin? Or is that just an impossible question to ask in a general terms? Is it more of a specific per person thing?
I mean, certainly I think it's very individual experience, but there are some things that might kind of gently move us towards more awareness. And, as I've mentioned before, there are lots of different therapeutic approaches, but what is probably the most common amongst all of them is the importance of awareness. So we can obtain awareness through lots of different forms, I suppose. One of the ways in which I would work is almost starting off with noticing what is happening in your body, because sometimes that can give us a clue as to what we might be feeling. So, for example, we would do something like a body scan or a mindfulness, a mindfulness-based body scan where we're paying attention to different parts of the body. It might be, for example, that when you feel anger, it's really common that we feel anger in our hands, for example. So we might notice we're fidgeting with our hands. It might be when you're feeling depressed or you're feeling flat that your shoulders are really slumped. That's very common. And we might notice an absence of sensation when you feel really flat. When you feel anxious, obviously that's a whole different experience. We get kind of like an overloading of sensory input in some ways. So I would often be asking like, okay, so you're sitting here, you don't really know what you're feeling. You don't really know what this emotion is, but what's happening in your body? What are you noticing right now? So that might be that's a first, potential step.
It's kind of like just to labour the analogy of opening the front door. It's like looking out the window to see who's at the front door without letting him in. You kind of a quick look and going, okay, they're here.
Yep. And it may be as simple as just saying, okay, I'm noticing this feels unpleasant. As a start.
Yeah.
But Josh, interestingly, when you said that your therapist gave you a book, I often do a similar thing, and there's and this is really common, is like the idea of the emotion wheel. Yeah. And so people can Google this, and it gives you really specific emotions that kind of start off. I guess they start off as like a main emotion, then they spread out to really specific or granular emotions. And I actually think that can be just a really useful place to start too, is knowing that there are these different kind of experiences.
Yeah. So is that something people can look up online, an emotional wheel?
Yeah, you can just Google emotion wheel.
Great.
And I mean, I can't speak to anyone in particular, but I think that they're generally fairly similar.
Yeah.
Give it a week and the Resilience Project will be selling emotional wheels.
Like a duck with a wheel.
Step right up. Spin the wheel of emotion.
I don't know if I've shared this anecdote with you before, but I just want to share it with you very quickly because I feel like it's even simplifying maybe this whole process even more. Back in 2013, 2014, I did a lot of work with kids who are in and out of juvie. And one of the things I remember once I went in there after there'd been a really big fight, and I said to one of the kids, "How are you feeling?" And he said, he would have been about 14, 15, he said, "I feel shit." And I said, no, what emotion are you feeling? And he said, "I don't know, shit." And I said, I'm after the emotion. He said, I don't know, I just feel shit. And I said, why do you feel shit? And he said, I got no idea, I just do. And then I had these cards with me, like these emoji cards or emoticon cards, almost like a Rolodex. And I said, I'm going to turn these cards over. And when you see a face that looks like how you feel, I want you to point to it. And on the back, I had the emotions written on the cards. And I'm turning them over, and he said, that one. And he stopped me.
Was it the poop emoji? Yeah, shit, that one. Just shit. That's it. Thanks, mate. Can I buy one of those journals?
And I kept going.
Sorry, yeah.
I could sense you. I had something really good then. You were like hovering over the mic. And I'm like, what's going on?
I got a winner.
It was nearly going to be too late. I had to get it in, sorry. I've ruined your flow. Sorry.
Anyway, that's fine. So I'm flipping through the emojis, and he said that one, and he pointed at it, and I couldn't see it because I was holding it in front of him. I turned it around, and it was the crying face. It was the tears, which one that we all use a lot. And on the back it said lonely, and I turned around and I said, it says you feel lonely. Do you feel lonely? And he said, guess so. And I said, can you say it? And he said, I feel lonely. And I said, why? And he told me like that. He said, mum and dad don't visit that much, and my mates from school, I haven't seen them in ages, so I feel lonely. So it's funny, like when you can name the emotion, you can get to the heart of what's going on so much quicker than when you can't name the emotion. And I think the emotional wheel sounds great, and I love that. I reckon there would be a certain group of people and a lot of people, I reckon, who are going, yeah, but I look at those words and they don't really speak to me at all. Sometimes like using the emojis can even be more of a, you can literally open your phone and look at all the faces and go, which one do I feel most like right now? And you can look at that. And so, yeah, that's just I guess it's just.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, actually. Like my 4-year-old is learning all this sort of stuff at school at the moment, and obviously, Hugh, I know that you do a lot of this stuff in schools too. But it blows my mind that they're talking about kind of zones of regulation.
Wow.
And the emotions that show up and how they feel that in their body and what their facial expressions do. And I think, that's such a great place, to be starting in terms of this kind of notion of emotional literacy, or even more specifically, like that kind of emotional agility. So there are lots of different ways in which we can do it, but it's just kind of having the presence of mind, really, to be able to bring your awareness to something is happening for me right now. Something is unpleasant, and I need to find a way in which to kind of uncover what that is, I suppose.
And I think just to come back to your analogy you started off with, which I think is so very good, the Brené Brown example of like if you've got a sore arm and then you can't describe it. I think everything you've talked about today helps us be better in that conversation when we're trying to describe what's going on for us. I see a physio a lot, and I've called him my hamstring therapist because he's like
the hamstring whisperer.
Yeah, he's like but just what you were saying before, when I go and see him, I'll say he spends 15, 20 minutes just writing notes on. He'll say, when did you first notice this? What have you done differently recently that's caused this? What does the pain feel like? Is it here? Can you feel it here? And it's like 15 minutes of gathering data, and I am so thorough. Like even before I see him, I'm preparing how I'm going to describe my hamstring, so he's got the best chance of fixing it, and I spend ages on it. And then I'll see my psychologist, and she'll say, how have you been this week? And my hamstring's fucked. But I will find it much harder to describe what I find it hard to describe what I'm going through in any given point in time. And I'm so cognizant of the fact that if this is my physio, I'd be giving him such better data to work with, such better information to work with. And he is the hamstring whisperer. His name's Andrew Wallace. I don't know why I'm saying his name. I'm convinced he's the best. I'm convinced he's the best. He doesn't need a plug. He's completely booked out for like 10 years, but I'm convinced he's the greatest physio in the world. And
where is he in Bondi?
Anyway, I give him so much information to work with, and he always fixes me. My psychologist, I can't give her quite the same detail, and I feel like to hear that knowing that kids as young as 4 years old are starting to work on this stuff, I feel like they've just got a much better chance of being able to talk through what they're going through, because it's not going to stop them going through hard times, but it will help them deal with it a lot better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is what's so important in this is the recognition that pain and suffering is inevitable in life, but we have to know how to be agile with that, or how to work with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a question about the second half of what you said right back at the start, where there was the inability to label the emotion, but then there was also this feeling of I should or shouldn't be feeling.
Yeah.
Because I think I feel like I was really lucky to have parents, incredibly lucky to have parents that would allow me to indulge in the emotions, definitely the wrong phrase, but to emote and would allow me to express the emotion properly and describe it. And I feel like I was lucky to therefore develop a certain amount of emotional literacy, but it didn't stop me for so much. I still get this today of feeling like I shouldn't be feeling like this. I should be feeling something else. And I find that really hard to escape to this day. It was worse earlier, but I still get it now. What's the should and shouldn't thing you were talking about before?
Actually, what you just said is so important. And it's this idea that when an unwanted experience arises, like when you feel a sadness, or you feel depression, or you feel anxiety, and what happens very quickly is we judge it as unwanted. We judge it as not wanting to have it here. And so if you imagine that there is like two circles, and a little circle and then a bigger circle, and in the first circle is what I would say is our pain. So that's like our primary first experience. So you feel a sense of loss when someone leaves, or there's an end of a relationship. We feel really lost. But what happens then is that when we notice that we have that feeling, we then judge it as not being okay. I hate this feeling. I hate being here. I don't want this feeling. I want this feeling to go away. This is really unpleasant. So what happens is that we move out of that first circle of pain, and then we move into kind of secondary pain, which is pain and suffering. And it's the pain and suffering that actually gets us really stuck. And that's where the should kind of language shows up. I shouldn't feel this way, or I should feel better, or I should feel grateful.
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
Very much so.
Is that kind of coming back to the emotion at the front door analogy?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, oh, this person I hadn't planned on this person coming. I've got this work to do. They shouldn't be here. And it's like getting annoyed that they're here because it's getting in the way of the thing that you wanted to do. And so that's the not answering the door. And then I always sort of think about it in terms of, I think it's Eckhart Tolle who says, you'll probably know this, Em, but what you resist persists. And it's like if you resist something, it will just grow. It's like cruel like that. It's like if you just say, no, I don't want that, and you resist it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, 100%. It's like akin to, like, emotional suppression is like pushing a beach ball under the water. Like, I don't want to see it. And then inevitably it just pops up again.
So as opposed to resisting it then, so what should people, what do you do? Obviously there's the answering the door, but then, in terms of.
Yeah. So, like, again, there are obviously different approaches to this, and there are some really significant things that are important. Obviously connection is one of those things. From my perspective, I would be kind of practicing compassion, like self-compassion, and probably using some mindfulness-based interventions as well. So even kind of being able to say, like, oh gosh, like that is tough. Like, I'm noticing I'm having a tough time. So using that kind of noticing language, there's a part of you that can observe your experience and isn't affected by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you can observe it, you can't be it. So if we can, with that observing mind, bring in some compassion for this, like, oh gosh, Em, like this is really hard. Like, I know you're having a tough time right now, and it's okay that you don't want it, but it's really here right now.
Yeah.
Does that
when I first learnt this like a couple of years ago, so my girlfriend Jam, she gets anxiety quite regularly, and we started calling her anxiety Annie. And so it was like when Anne, it's like, oh, Annie's here. And so it's like, oh, Annie got here this morning, and she's been around all day and she's no fun. but she'll leave soon. She'll leave soon. And you've got to obviously do the things to try and like convince Annie to leave. But that has really helped actually. I think it's easier. It's sort of slightly easier in some ways. It doesn't cure it or solve it, obviously, but it does. Creating that separation has really helped, I think.
Oh, that's a great example. And the other thing that it does is that it gives you an opportunity then to say, okay, well, what is it that I really need right now? And it might be like in terms of action, it might be that, what I really need, what would be helpful for me would be to go and call my mum. Or it might be that I need to go for a walk. It might be that I need to go and practice a meditation. So that's when we kind of can move into some problem solving. But the first part of it is dropping the judging, because that's that inner critic. And so when Steen was talking about this kind of thing, like I should be grateful, and I guess this is tying into what you said earlier, Hugh, is that when we use that kind of should language, it really is activating that inner critic and it's activating the threat center. So we're moving away from a genuine present moment focus of feeling grateful.
I've always been terrible at at self-compassion, I think. It's been a real I'm very quick to judge myself. And I think that's not an uncommon experience. I think a lot of people judge themselves to a much higher or a different standard to how they would react to someone else. And I always have to continually remind myself, if it was like someone else and they're going through this, what would you say to them? And maybe just give yourself a break. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do, but
it's really tricky. And it actually sometimes, like if there's a trauma background in particular, it can be really hard to express some sort of self-compassion. And if that is the case, I'd be very encouraging of people seeking therapy to learn how to do that, because actually, being able to do that can feel almost triggering, particularly if you didn't experience self-compassion as a child, or compassion as a child. So that there's some kind of caveats to that, I think, that are important to note.
It's also easy to get yourself into a spiral pretty quickly of like, why can't you just give yourself a break? Like you can't even do that.
Exactly.
And you're just like,
So like in that instance, it might even be, okay, so, that's actually feeling too overwhelming, that's feeling too hard. So let's come back to, what I've spoken about earlier around coming back to your senses. So like grounding your feet on the floor, opening your ears, looking around what you can see. So really taking this kind of almost like a circuit breaker to stop or interrupt that inner critic in its kind of full flight, I suppose.
Amazing.
Awesome. I'm so happy you've chosen this.
This is huge.
Topic and episode today, because I feel like this applies to everyone.
Yeah.
Like there'll be no one listening going, I should tell my friend about that. They'll need this. I think all of us, we all go through highs and lows with life, and emotions will come and go, and we're way too quick to attach them to ourselves and either try to fight them, or we just think that I'm just a sad person or a lonely person, or rather than observing them and dealing with them in really healthy ways. I think it's so good. So thank you for choosing that one. I love the Steen episode. The moment that which Josh edited in, I thought really beautifully, was just the actual conversation he had with his papua. I mean, I've listened to that every single time. It makes me cry so much, like every single time. It's an incredibly powerful moment.
Yeah.
It was amazing, honestly. It was so moving, and I mean, there's lots of stuff in that episode, but just the connection and how incredibly important that is really stood out to me.
I'm kind of blown away that he might not have had the words to say it then, but then as a creative person who wanted to delve deeper, he spent like 15 years or whatever working it out and then coming up with it and delivering it in the most creatively interesting and using a lot of words to describe it, and such a powerful and what an experience, if we're talking about being able to name the emotion, to be able to create something that sums up the emotion and use creativity in that way. That must be just the most, what an experience.
But that is the power of any art, really, for the artist and also the person watching it or listening to it. It's like that is what good art can do.
Yeah. And can art and creativity, music and movies and play a role in this as well?
100%. And I was just gonna add that too. I mean, there's, like, for example, art therapy is incredible. And so sometimes if we are lacking kind of the emotional language or the kind of granularity around that, for some people, irrespective of your ability, the capacity to draw, to paint, to create, it can be extraordinarily therapeutic and really can kind of demonstrate what it is that you're actually feeling inside. And so again, we're very much using different parts of the brain when we're doing something like that, which can again really mediate that threat center. And I guess it's just another form of expression of being able to specify how it is that I'm feeling. So definitely art, definitely music, any kind of creative aspect, I think, if we're able to kind of reflect how it is that we're feeling is very powerful. Absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Em.
Dr. M, incredible. Just what an ep.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Or what an M, because we're calling them emisodes. So it's confusing.
What
but
an
probably have to. What an M-isode.
What an M and what an emisode.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Em. It's great to chat to you again, and thank you for your knowledge.
It's a pleasure, and I'll put some references in the show notes too. But certainly, Brené Brown's book is a really great resource in terms of unpacking emotional.
That's her new,
experience.
the Atlas of the Heart. I haven't read that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
cool.
great.
Do we have show notes?
Yeah.
Do we have show notes? This is season 4, Hugh. That is such an insight into Hugh's contribution to the back end of this podcast. Oh, wonderful. Oh, what an exposing sentence.
You can see you're reading all Ryan's hard work.
Well, thank you, Hugh.
I'm sorry, that was so offensive.
No. You've got a lot of reading to do. Em, thank you so much. Great to see you. Great to chat.
Oh, thanks for having
Em.
me. Yeah, I'll
See you
see you
next
guys
time.
soon.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, edited by Jamison Moore, filmed by Andy Poole and social mediaed by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support. Our acknowledgement of country was delivered by Marley Silver, and you can find Marley's podcast, Chicks and Balls, on all the podcast platforms.